Joining us now, New York Times political correspondents Jonathan Martin and Alex Burns. They're the authors of a hot new bestseller, This Will Not Pass, Trump, Biden, and the Battle for America's Future. Thank you for joining us. Among the reasons your book is especially interesting is that you capture almost in real time what is going on currently in the Biden administration, as well as the events leading up to and following January 6th. Now, as our listeners may know, your very big scoop was how House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, after January 6th, was telling people that Trump ought to resign. And we'll get to that. But one of the things that I also find for Chicago Sun-Times audience here really interesting in your book is that you were chock full of Illinois stories. So Jonathan and Alex, thank you for doing that. You have a marvelous story in there about Senator Tammy Duckworth and what was going on during the time when she was under consideration by Joe Biden to be the vice president candidate. Jonathan first, and then Alex, could you jump in and tell us that anecdote from your book?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us, Lynn and Laura. It's good to see you guys and talking to our readers in Chicagoland. Yes, Tammy Duckworth, the junior Illinois senator, was very much under consideration for VP in the summer of 2020. I think Joe Biden was really attracted to both her resume, her war service, her kind of bootstraps, personal history, and also I think just had a good personal bond with her too, Liz. I think they're both kind of no BS type people, or at least they consider themselves to be no BS type people. And I think Biden saw a kindred spirit in her. It got complicated, though. I don't think that this was entirely the reason that Senator Duckworth wasn't the pick, but there were concerns about the fact, she was born in Thailand, and I think there were concerns in the Biden camp that Donald Trump would use that, not just for sort of demagogic purposes, although of course he would do that, but also would get, some court in some state to raise questions about her eligibility for the presidency and to create kind of mischief or at least headaches for a Biden Duckworth ticket.
On it. So, Alex, you had a very great quote. It involved a swear word on there that Tammy said that she has dealt with these. It starts with A before on it. Let me also bring up the other great Illinois part you had in there was about Rahm Emanuel. Now, he enters your book in two places. One of them is where, even though Tammy Duckworth from Illinois is in play to be vice president, he's advising Biden to pick Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. What was up with that? And there's a backstory to the backstory here, Alex.
Sure. Look, I think that this is one of the subplots of the vice presidential process that I didn't really break through at the time, but there was a very significant constituency close to Joe Biden that believed that choosing somebody from outside of Washington would be helpful to the ticket, that Joe Biden is sort of the consummate Washington insider, a creature of the Senate, and that getting somebody who represented balance in that way would be important. And at the same time, the prevailing view in the Biden campaign, and obviously the one that ultimately shaped his choice more, was it was important that he choose a woman of color. And then after the murder of George Floyd, specifically a Black woman, because of the moment the country was experiencing and because of the debt that Biden personally owed to Black voters and Black women in particular, because of the way the Democratic primary unfolded. But there were also people close to Joe Biden who felt like we're just trying to get to 270 here any way we can. And if that means picking a white woman who happens to be at the time, pretty popular governor of a pretty important state on the electoral map, then maybe that's the shortest distance from point A to point B. And we should just be willing to take the heat that we're going to get if we don't have a ticket that represents a racial diversity. That's obviously not the choice that Biden ultimately made. But I do think that it's sort of similar to Tammy Duckworth. Gretchen Whitmer got farther in the process than people understood at the time. And when Democrats are sort of looking around the country at who could lead them forward in the future, if it's not Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I think we're going to hear these names again.
But it was interesting. That does, Rahm Emanuel, now the ambassador to Japan.
His Excellency.
Where President Biden is going to be in a few days. So we'll see the spotlight on Rahm and his diplomacy. But here is one of the reasons your book is making the impact for history that it is that you actually have tapes that you released of Kevin McCarthy's conversations. How do you have these tapes? Did these people know they were being recorded? How did this come about?
Well, I'll just say I'll let Jonathan give a more serious answer to this question, but I will just say that people in Washington have been asking us, like, is everybody here just recording everybody all the time? And you guys know what that's like in Chicago already for very different reasons. This is a more informal kind of recording, but
so what can you tell us about how these tapes came to be?
We can tell you that we don't discuss our sources, which won't come as a shock to you, Lynn. But look, I think you'll appreciate this more than most. Journalism is not a sort of a Hollywood story. You have to claw, you have to track stuff down, you have to sniff out rumor and hearsay and secondhand tips, and eventually you get some sort of version of events, and you try to get the closest thing to what happened. We were really lucky in putting together this book that through 2 years of hard work, we were able to compile, a number of primary source documents, memos, contemporaneous notes from meetings, and yes, audio recordings of some conversations that I think really helped us create an accurate account of this extraordinary moment in American political history. And I think it's going to be, not to sound immodest, I think, Lynn, it's going to be a contribution to future historians who try to sort of make sense of this period. They're going to have that primary source documentation. Yeah. It's not just based on memory or sort of disputed versions of events. This is the account of what happened in the room, on the line. We have it in this book.
I know sometimes it can just be a really important, as we all know as reporters, it's an important way to verify, to force people to tell the truth, right? If you got the tape, because they're going to always, not always, but a lot of politicians are always going to lie or deny or obfuscate. But if you've got the tape there, there's no more conversation. And so wherever you got the tape from, it's sort of it was a really important and a huge safety valve that really kept the record straight on that.
Well, this is a technical question, by the way. Speaking of history, obviously the book will live on, whether in a book form, online. If these tapes are part of the historic part, in a sense, package with your books, how can you guarantee that they'll have them?
It's a really fair question. It's something we're trying to resolve, right now. Without getting into the real nitty-gritty details of this, just for reasons of sensitivity, look, there are limitations in how we've agreed to, use these tapes and be sort of discreet and protective of the methods in which we got them. And, as like a reporter would never forgive him or herself if, you released something that inadvertently broke the confidence of the people who made it possible for you to have access to it in the first place. But I think we feel very strongly, not just with the tapes, but Jonathan just referred to notes and memos and things like that. Like, we don't want this stuff to just sit in a Google Drive under our names until everybody forgets that we're around and that any of this ever happened. We do want this to be available, and we're just figuring out how to do that.
Interesting. So I want to come up to present day, because we're speaking a few days after some significant results in Tuesday primaries. So can you analyze, let's just take one state, where the Trump factor really seemed to manifest it. Pennsylvania, Republican primary. The Republican nominee is an election denier, January 6th attendee. Jonathan, first you and then Alex, can you analyze the Trump factor there? And I'm not sure yet if in the Senate primary has it been called? Did Dr. Oz win? We're in a recount there? I think
Very likely headed for one, yeah.
Okay, so let's go with the governor candidate first, Jonathan. Your analysis.
Sure. So this is somebody who was one of the real ringleaders of trying to overturn the 2020 election. And there's grave concern, Lynn, that if he's governor in 2024, that he would do so again. And because in Pennsylvania, the governor has the authority to effectively, nominate and oversee the election administration in the state, he would have basically total control to do that. So
because he appoints the Secretary of State. In
Pennsylvania.
Exactly
right. So, in a pivotal state like Pennsylvania, which can be really decisive in White House elections, like this is cause for alarm.
So, Alex, President Biden started using the term MAGA Republicans. He means it as either dismissive or derogatory, but MAGA Republicans take it as a badge of honor. So if you could overlay this on the results in primary in other states, what's the Biden team really doing here? Didn't they understand how this could backfire?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll see if it backfires or whether it just kind of sputters. It's not sort of an epithet that strikes me as like some devastating a takedown. Like the idea that Democrats think that repeating that as a mantra is going to get them very far. I personally don't see it. I do think that, look, the overall picture that Democrats are trying to remind the country of and sharpen for the country is that the Republican Party is very, very extreme at this point, or that the extreme forces in the Republican Party are on the ascent. And what we're going to need to see is whether Republican primary voters cooperate with that story, right? That we see this one candidate, Mastriano, in Pennsylvania. We'll see about the outcome of the Senate primary there. You see a couple other governor primaries across the Great Lakes region, right? Including in Illinois, up in Minnesota, potentially in Michigan as well, where the party is nominating some people or may nominate some people who are very, very, very far to the right. And it actually goes beyond just being, to me, the MAGA Republicans label almost undersells the case, right? Because like a lot of Republicans associate themselves with Donald Trump, but there are some characters who are getting nominated who are a sort of extreme even by the standards of the Trump era Republican Party. And if the GOP does go in that direction, then, look, I think it's going to be a good year for them because it's a midterm election of a Democratic president, and that's what happens. But the gains might not be everything that they could if they keep nominating folks like this.
Well, I guess one interesting thing was the defeat of Madison Cawthorn. It's going to be a Republican district no matter what. But do you think that was just a one-off because of his unique circumstances, of his personal behavior? Or
I think it's more complicated than that. I mean, I think obviously his own circumstances and the trouble he's created for himself made him ripe for defeat. But I think that the Republican Party could take a lesson from that, which is to say that when there is the will in the leadership class of the Republican Party, both in terms of donors, lobbyists, and lawmakers, to take somebody out who you think is a threat to the party, that you can do that. Not with, super moderate anti-Trump people necessarily, but with sort of mainstream conservatives who are not going to perhaps have the baggage. So, yeah, I mean, Cawthorn was a sort of ripe target, Lynn, but it takes the will, and it takes somebody like Tom Tillis, for example, the senator from North Carolina, to step up and publicly oppose an incumbent like that. And I think once people like that act, it creates a snowball effect and sort of others step forward as well.
Speaking of stepping up, this leads to another story that's been in the news, and that's the terrible shootings in Buffalo and the alleged connection of the shooter to this white replacement theory and this conversation that's taking place in some conservative circles around people of color and immigrants replacing whites, and that the shooter was angry because of that. And there's been some criticism of some GOP leaders, Adam Kinzinger and others have stepped up and said that the GOP is not speaking out strongly enough against this this philosophy, and that's a dangerous thing. What's your take on, you guys, on that? And is this a danger for the party, particularly as we move into the midterms? This reluctance to step up.
Well, I think first of all, it's clearly a danger, sort of separate and apart from politics, that this continues to become a more and more mainstream strain of rhetoric in a right-wing politics and right-wing media. We've seen the deadly consequences for that, and it's one of the things that I think is sort of missing in or can be missing in a debate about this stuff. That it's not that every time a Republican politician spouts that kind of stuff, it is inherently an act of incitement that leads directly to violence. But the more and more this becomes sort of an accepted part of the political debate, the more and more people who are fanatical and even violent sort of participate in that conversation in even more sinister ways. I think it's dangerous to the Republican Party in sort of raw political terms, because particularly because they've actually shown over the last couple of years that they're capable of reaching out to communities of color in some surprising ways. That on issues like inflation, like crime, and including like immigration, there are voters of color who are open to hearing a more right-leaning argument on all of those subjects. And so it's certainly a politically complicated and perhaps self-defeating thing to be talking to voters of color about keeping their communities safe and keeping them employed or their businesses open, and also sort of going on Fox News or on Twitter and complaining that they're replacing white people. That strikes me as not, to say the least, like not a consistent line of outreach.
What about their positions on gun control? That's a big part of this story as well. This was a young man allegedly who was able to get a hold of a gun. Are they vulnerable on that issue?
I think they're vulnerable in some places, right? But as we've seen over and over, right, much of the country, and particularly when you get to the level of Senate races, much of the country is very, very supportive of broad and almost unrestricted gun rights. But look, under ordinary circumstances in a midterm election year, Republicans ought to make huge gains in those sort of moderate suburban areas where they suffered so badly in the Trump years. And these issues that we're going through here, election denial, sort of overt or nearly overt racism, opposition to even modest gun control efforts, those are issues, and we're not even talking yet about Roe v. Wade. Those are all issues that moderate suburban voters generally sort of lean further to the left on.
Well, actually, we'll see as soon as the court decision comes down if abortion can negate some other issues that are in play right now, from crime, inflation, diving stock market, though that isn't as across the board as the infant formula shortage. So let me turn to Biden, because in a sense, Biden is still the great undercovered story in Washington right now, because Trump still overshadows, and Trumpism and the MAGA Republicans still take up so much of the reportorial oxygen.
Yeah. We've noticed that too, Lynn.
Well, okay, let's just pause here. Can you speak to that? We've all seen different coverages of White House. Is it Biden does stuff, but I think this is more than messaging. Is it because he can't make a deal, and therefore what? What's your analysis, Jonathan?
There was pretty intense coverage, at least of the congressional negotiations in 2021. I think the Trump story is just so galvanizing. Is he going to try to come back and run again? And all the implications for that. By the way, there are grave questions about what that could mean for the future of American democracy. I'm not dismissing it or sort of belittling it by any means, but it's a lot of coverage for a former president compared to the actual current head of the American government, and somebody who has total control, or his party has total control over the government. And it's striking to sort of see as we get into 22 just how little coverage there is of Biden. But having done this book, it actually was pretty rewarding because Alex and I were able to get a lot of material that is new, that is fresh about President Biden, about his inner circle, and about their dealings with Congress that I think are going to be eye-opening for a lot of readers out there.
Well, it is. And also, so we'll know soon, to me, the early voting has started in a lot of states. As we speak on Thursday, it kicks off in Illinois on it. You have used, either you have embraced the phrase or used it, that we're at, and we're in our closing minutes now, that the moment in time we're in is a stress test for democracy. Now, isn't that true for, it's not just on the Republicans, it's on Democrats too, with their divides within the Democratic Party, where you have these, Democrats control the House, Senate, and the White House, yet Biden can't force a deal, even in the few months he has left. Alex, what do you make of this situation?
No, I couldn't have said it better. And look, I think that there's a sort of moment in sort of news consumption right now where a lot of folks who are readers on the left of center hear something like what you just said and think like, well, you're saying the two parties are the same and they're both sort of equally morally culpable in the decline of it. No, nobody's saying that here, right? There's one party is in thrall to a sort of would-be authoritarian demagogue, and the other party just sort of can't get its act together. And those are not morally equivalent, but they're both dangerous to a public trust in democracy and public participation in a democratic system. Because I hate to sound super old-fashioned here, but the way this is supposed to work is that you tell the voters what you're going to do, and then they vote for the stuff that they want you to do. And then whoever wins actually does a good bit of that stuff. And if that chain gets broken, as it has, for most of my lifetime, it's hard to sustain faith in the system in ways that, even before you get to sort of outright election denial or sabotage, it's hard to sustain faith in the system if people get promised stuff and then they vote for it and then they don't get like almost any of it.
Jonathan, what is the true meaning behind the title, "This Will Not Pass"? What will not pass, Jonathan?
It can be read a number of ways, but I would just say that the larger, perhaps overall message is that we're not covering or living through history. We're still experiencing an ongoing threat to the American democratic system, that the two parties are being really tested, especially the Republican Party, which, as Alex said, has not proven a willingness to confront, let alone condemn, a twice impeached, disgraced former president who has no regard for the kind of norms of our democratic system. And that, the biggest challenge may still yet lay ahead. I think what was so sobering, Lynn, in doing the reporting on this book, especially in Congress, where we talked to dozens of lawmakers in the House and Senate in both parties, was this pervasive feeling of alarm that perhaps January 6th was not the culmination, was not the end point, but perhaps was merely one more grim milestone on the way to further political violence and certainly a further degradation of our democracy. And I think that that's what's so concerning, is that we're still experiencing this. The story isn't over yet, Lynn.
Well, we're out of time. This is a great discussion. And actually, on that point, we are going to see what becomes of the January 6th public hearings that are supposed to come up in June. So we truly will see if this will not pass. I'm speaking to the authors of the New York Times political correspondents, old friends Jonathan Martin and Alex Burns. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Laura. See you guys. Take care.
Thanks for being with us.